All right, let's go.
Alright, so we're rolling?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm Cadet Zierman Hutt.
I'm Chief Master Sergeant Lambert.
Alright, and we're sitting here right now with Major Manny Block. And we're just going to ask him some questions. Going to try to get some information out of him. Alright, so can you tell us why you joined CAP? Why you joined Civil Air Patrol?
To fly.
Is that the only reason, sir?
Yes.
It is? Alright. When did you start flying?
I started flying in September of 1943.
Really?
And I had 9 hours of dual instruction, and then I didn't do anything with it for 21 years.
Oh, really?
And in 1964, I finally got my private pilot certificate.
So what were you flying before?
I started flying when I had just turned 18. I was going to the Navy Radio Technician School for Aviation in Corpus Christi.
Oh.
And on weekends, I would go out to the local grass strip and take instruction. I graduated from the course and left Texas, and one thing or another kept me from flying until 1964. And in 1964, the desire to fly came back, and I absolutely had to get back into the air. So I did, and I got my private certificate in 1964, in September of 1964. And then I joined the Civil Air Patrol the next year in March of 1965. And I had no idea what it was all about. I knew they had airplanes that I could fly, and that was the incentive. Once I got in the Civil Air Patrol, well, then I enjoyed many, many activities besides just the flying part of it. It became a major part of my life, the social part of it, the friends that I made, activities, far beyond the flying. Although I did an awful lot of flying in the Civil Air Patrol. I flew thousands of hours on the Civil Air Patrol missions.
Oh, wow. So you've been involved with Civil Air Patrol since 1965?
Since 1965.
So
it's 49 years.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever flown for the military?
In the military, I was a technician. I served aboard aircraft carriers, and I had numerous opportunities to get rides in airplanes. And I've ridden in a lot of military airplanes, but just as a passenger, only in peacetime. I did get a couple of flights off the carrier after the war was over. I got to ride in a Curtiss Helldiver SB-2C dive bomber, and we did practice dive bombing off the coast of China in 1945. I rode in a TBM, torpedo bomber, and we did practice strafing and shooting guns off the carrier. So I did have a lot of opportunity to get rides, but my job was fixing radios and radar and other electronic equipment.
Wow. All right, so now we know you're in the Navy. All right, so how did that start? How did you join the Navy?
Well, my father was in the Navy in World War I, and World War II was well in progress when I turned 17, the minimum age you could join the Navy. And I was anxious to go, and the high school had an arrangement where you could leave high school early if you were going to college. I told them I was going to college. They said, fine, you'll get your degree, and I joined the Navy. And that was in December 30th of 1942. And I had taken an examination to qualify for radio technician training, and I spent 9 months going to radio radar schools learning what I needed to know to service electronic equipment on board aircraft carriers, and that's what I did.
Why did you want to join the war?
Any 17-year-old kid, red-blooded kid, wants to join the war. We were too dumb to know, that might be dangerous to your health. We just were all gung-ho, all my friends, we all joined up.
Did you ever serve with any?
And most of us came back.
Oh. Did you serve with any of your friends on your carriers? Or
Pardon?
Did you serve with any of your friends on your carriers? Or Like any
I made a lot of friends on the aircraft
Oh,
carrier.
right.
Unfortunately, we lost track of each other and never stayed in touch. I've gone to one reunion and didn't see anyone there that I know. I did talk to one person that I had served with, but he didn't come to the reunion. And that's what happens. You go through life, make a lot of friends, but they fall by the wayside as time goes on, and you make more new friends.
Have you stayed in touch with any of your old friends? over the
No,
years?
I've lost touch with them all.
See. So we could go back to the Civil Air Patrol questions, maybe. So 49 years, you said, involved with
Yes.
Civil Air Patrol. So what's changed the most, you think?
Well, we don't do the missions that we used to. We used to do a lot of work for the DEA, for local law enforcement, local state law enforcement, federal. I've been on a number of missions in support of these agencies, local, state, and federal agencies. I don't see us doing much of that anymore, and I don't know why. But it was very interesting when I did that.
So you went on missions with DEA and all that, like?
Oh yes, a number of them. Mostly it was transport. I didn't really know a lot of what was going on. I've flown an airplane where the baggage compartment was full of marijuana. I flew in an airplane where the baggage compartment was full of guns and ammunition. I've flown to a prison. I've flown to rendezvous sites with agents. I've flown a surveillance mission. Most of the time, I just did what they told me. I just took them from point A to point B, and I wasn't involved other than transporting the people. But sometimes, after we landed, they would take me with them, and I'd visit their offices and wait around while they did whatever it is they were doing. And I don't see that being done much anymore, unless there are some things being done that I'm not aware of, which there might be, such as TSA-related activities. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
Did you ever feel like you were in danger in any of those situations?
Not really. I can remember one time I ferried some agents to Gary, Indiana. And they said, all right, wait for us, we'll be back later in the afternoon. I said, well, I think I'm going to walk down the street to the McDonald's. It's about a mile away. He said, well, we have guns. You don't have a gun. I would not walk from this airport to McDonald's without a gun.
Really?
Apparently, Gary, Indiana was not particularly safe in that area. So the airport manager let me his car, and I drove to the McDonald's and ate and drove back. And that's as close as I came to any danger.
Wow. So what's changed on the cadet side? Like, what's your impression of cadets today?
Oh, I think it's better organized.
You think?
I think it's much better organized. I think the activities are pertinent to where the cadets are in their life, particularly career development. Is so important to try and gain experience in a number of things, one of which might be your life work. It was not as well organized or directed in the 60s. It was pretty much ride around on airplanes and walk around in the woods, and not the organized type activity that we have today.
Right.
If you could change one thing about the program, what would you change today?
The senior program or the cadet program?
Either.
I think more structure. I think that what I would like to see is a plan for the quarter where we know every week what's going to happen. And people then can see what is going to happen at the meeting and decide whether that's of interest to them or not. But I think we need more looking forward rather than planning about a week at a time. I think our planning needs to go out farther than it does. That's the only thing I can think of that I would change. other than, you know, the CAP, like any other large organization, is very bureaucratic, very paperwork oriented, but it's not that different from what I experienced in my 39 years in the military-industrial complex, both working with government and working with various corporations. The CAP behaves like other big organizations.
All right. So what did you do when you got out of the military?
Well,
Did you ever go to
I
college?
had a choice. Actually, before I left the ship, I was offered the chance to become a chief petty officer. I was first class, and I was fairly senior in the repair shop, and they needed a chief. So if I re-enlisted and stayed, I could have made chief and toured the world on the aircraft carrier. I might have stayed in the military. I might have stayed in the Navy had I made chief. It was a difficult decision, but I decided, no, I want to go to school. I want to be an electrical engineer. So I got home, and then I got a letter from RCA offering me a good job with high pay to go back to the Pacific and maintain radar systems on islands and various places, and that was a lot of money. It was tough to turn it down, but I decided, no, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. So I became one. And unfortunately, when I graduated in the summer of 1949, I went straight through, I went 4 summers in a row. There were no engineering jobs available. So I taught at the University of South Dakota for 2 years. I taught engineering subjects there, and I loved it. And then after 2 years, the engineering field opened up again, and I came back to the Twin Cities, got a job, and been here ever since. This is my home. I was born in North Minneapolis. So the teaching was something that I really enjoyed, but I was torn between staying in South Dakota and doing graduate work, getting a PhD, which you need if you're going to get tenure as a college professor, and taking the engineering job. Well, I took the engineering job, but I taught part-time evenings for many years, for about 25 years, all during my engineering career. So I really had the best of both worlds. I was doing things that I enjoyed thoroughly, teaching electronics in the evening and working as an engineer during the day. And then when I got my instructor certificate, I was teaching flying on weekends. So I was kind of running 3 activities simultaneously: flight instructing and teaching electronics at the vocational schools and doing my engineering work in the daytime. So when it came time to retire as an engineer when I was 65, I actually stepped up my teaching. I worked half-time for about 12 years for Dakota County Technical College, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And actually, I made more money because I worked on contracts. They would pay me to develop a course that I would teach at a company's plant. And I've taught electronic courses all around the area, at the telephone company, at a paper box manufacturing company, at a couple of companies in Northfield, and so on. And I enjoyed that thoroughly. I enjoyed it so much that I decided I needed to get some formal education in teaching. I had none. I just kind of learned on the job. So when I was 74 years old, I decided to go back to school. And that was 1999. So I went to the university and found out they had a few courses that seemed to be of interest. And I took one. It was tremendous. I hadn't been to school for almost 50 years. And I sat down, opened up my notebook, and started taking notes. It's as though I'd never left the classroom. And so I talked to them about getting a degree in education, and a year and a half later I had a Master of Education degree.
Really?
And I was going, I didn't want to quit. I enjoyed it thoroughly because when you're retired, you have the time to really get into things. You can spend a lot of time in the library, you can go talk to people. The course was terrific. being on the campus with young people and co-eds, it was just sheer enjoyment for me. I had plenty of time to do the homework, so I kept on going, and in 2007, when I was 81 years old, I finished graduate school and got a PhD in education.
How many degrees do you have, sir?
Just 3.
Just 3.
And I didn't really want to quit going to school, so I took a course in Minnesota history, which was marvelous. I loved it. But the courses that I wanted, which were more history courses, were filled. I couldn't get into them, so the semester was already gone, so I decided, well, now what am I going to do? Well, I went back to an old love, music.
Oh, really?
So for the last 6 years, I've been a piano student at McPhail School of Music.
That's cool.
And I take a lesson every week. I practice an hour and a half a day. And it's very difficult. It's the most difficult thing I have ever done in my life. I have no particular talent, but I bought myself a grand piano, and I'm bound and determined that I'm going to learn. And it's slow going, but I'm learning. So I'm still a student. And it turns out that without my conscious effort, that my whole life has been nothing but learning. One thing I didn't realize, when you're an engineer, you're always learning, because engineers very often are thrust into situations that nobody knows what to do. And in order to figure out something, you have to learn. I had to make the transition from vacuum tubes to transistors on my own, with no help, no classes, just books, doing things on the workbench, and I had to teach myself the whole art of semiconductors. That was just one learning experience. Each program that I worked on required me to do that. For example, one of the tasks I had was to develop automatic controls for making TNT. What does an electrical engineer know about making TNT? Chemistry was my worst subject.
Oh.
I was lucky to get C's in chemistry. Now I had to design controls for making TNT. Well, first I had to learn how to make TNT. It took me 6 months, but by the time I was through, we had a line assigned to us at the Joliet Arsenal. And I spent many weeks at the Joliet Arsenal taking pictures, talking to people about how you make TNT. I looked at every valve, I looked at every pipe, I looked at all the kettles and everything they had. So after 6 months, I knew about as much of how you actually made TNT. I didn't know a lot of the theory, but I knew what they actually did, because I stood behind people and watched them do the things that are necessary to make TNT. Following that 6-month learning period, then I designed the automatic control system for the 3 nitrator houses and the wash house and so on. I knew the business. That lasted about 1.5 years. The next job I was assigned required additional learning. I had to learn a bunch of electronic stuff about power companies and so on in order to develop some recording equipment that I was assigned to build. So I did that, and that was the whole engineering career. And looking back on it, that's what engineering is all about. Because if people knew what they were doing, they wouldn't need engineers. So you're thrust into a situation where, using your basic scientific background and your experience, you can learn what you need to learn. And then I got into management. I spent most of my career in management. Well, how do you manage people? I had to learn how to do that. Fortunately, I was able to get some courses. I took a lot of management courses, and that was very helpful. And then later in my career, when I retired from UNIVAC, I had a very lucrative offer to retire, and I took it in 1981, and I moved over to Control Data. I told them at Control Data, I don't want to be a manager anymore. I'll take a reduction in pay. And I did. It didn't last. Didn't last. Unfortunately, I got arm twisted, and I eventually was manager of quality programs for our division. And it wasn't any better than management before. I wanted to be a hands-on engineer always. But the money was in management, and I learned enough about management to be good enough at it. So that's where I made the most money. But toward the end, I finally walked away from it and I said, I don't want to be a manager anymore, I want to be an engineer, and I was, and I finished my career as an engineer. So it was, but it was interesting. But I had to learn the whole business of quality. I got involved in quality, and I had to learn what's going on in the field of quality and productivity and running factories and all of that kind of stuff. So I think an engineer that can get involved in things other than desk work. I never stayed at my desk. I was always walking around, walking through the factory when I had my workshop and did lab work when I was designing things. My first 10 years I was a designer. I designed all kinds of things. Wonderful. But the thing is, you have to move up into management if you want to make the big money. So I did. But all the time I taught in the evenings, and that was fun. I loved it. And then the flight instructing. So I guess I had the best of all possible worlds.
Oh, yeah.
But constant learning, that was the name of the game, constant learning. And I think that's true of any technical field. Maybe it's true of any field. If you're going to get anywhere, you have to keep on learning. You will never find a niche and stick with it, because eventually you're going to become obsolete and get laid off. I saw that happen to hundreds of engineers. They got stuck in a niche. They weren't all that interested or curious in learning more, and they didn't last. I think I'm one of the few engineers that made a living as an engineer from start to finish.
So any advice for any new learners?
Pardon?
Any advice for learners or students that you'd like to give?
Yes. High school should teach you to be a scholar. If you're not a scholar, when you leave high school, you're going to have problems. You have to learn how to learn. And college is kind of a finishing school for learning how to learn. But you better know how to learn when you get into college. And if you didn't get that in high school, it's going to be tough. And once you get out of college, if you're a scholar, you'll be able to learn and pick up whatever you need, because you have to learn on your own. The days of a company teaching you whatever you need to know, and then you do that for 40 years, are long gone. Chances are, every 18 months you're in something that's totally different, something you never even heard of in school. And if you can get some courses, that's fine. But oftentimes you have to learn by picking up a manual and reading it, trial and error, talk to people. Communication skill for an engineer is absolutely essential, and that includes talking and listening and reading and writing. As an engineer, I had to do a lot of communicating. I had to write proposals, I had to write program plans, I had to write progress reports, I had to go to Washington and talk to government people about what was going on. I had to talk to suppliers, I had to write specifications, I had to draw drawings, and it was taken for granted. You're an engineer, you can do that stuff. So here, Manny, write a 100-page plan for how we're going to approach this problem. Or for the next 3 weeks, you're going to be writing a section of a proposal to get us $100 million worth of business if we're lucky. And if you can't do that, stay out of engineering, stay out of the technical world. I think the course that did the most for me was high school English. Thank goodness that I had a wonderful high school teacher, Clara Nelson. She pushed us to read, to write, extemporaneous speaking, debate, you name it. And it was the communication skills that got me into management, which got me the money.
That's a rare one to hear. People don't usually say English is a big thing at school.
It's so important. It's so important. English is the most important course you can take. Written and spoken communication is essential, because how does industry work? It works by people talking to each other and writing to each other. Nowadays it's probably more writing with the internet and so on. But anybody can get good at the internet in terms of the mechanics of it. But how can you communicate in a way that when somebody is looking at your email, the first couple of sentences grabs them. They don't have to wade through pages and paragraphs, and a lot of times you're trying to convince somebody of something. You've got to learn how to write, so you hit them right between the eyes in the first few sentences, or if you're making a presentation, how to get your point across without putting people to sleep. That is crucial, because business is all about making money. And anybody's job in a company is to get the customer to take the money out of their pocket and put it into yours.
That's the key to business.
And anybody in the business that's making any amount of money at all is going to have to learn how to do that. Because that's the whole point of business. And if you miss that, if you don't understand that the only reason you're there is because you're helping the company make money, you're going to be sadly disappointed. It's a lesson that should be learned right at the outset, because that's the only reason why they need you, is because you're helping them make money. Well, the better you are at that, the more money you're going to make. And it comes down to a lot of personal skills. And a lot of that can be learned. I wasn't born with the ability to read and write.
Yeah. So just sort of another cog in the machine, just another part of it?
Pardon?
Just another part of the industry, you're saying?
Well, it's just taken for granted. If you're going to get anywhere, you are a good communicator.
All right.
And a lot of people don't understand that. They think that their technical skills alone, or whatever skills they learn in high school and college, are adequate to get them through life. These are the first people to get laid off. And nowadays, as I mentioned before, every 18 months you're in a new career. And you have to be able to roll with those punches. And you have to, your company may go out of business. Companies rise and fall so quickly, so you need to know how to develop a network. People need to know that you're good at whatever it is. Well, how do people know that you're good at anything? It's by your ability to communicate.
All right.
Well, meeting's just about over, so.
It's almost time for Joseph's, right?
Yes.
Do you have anything else you'd like to say, Mandy?
Do I what?
Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Nothing that won't wait.
Yes, sir.
I can ramble on forever.
Yes, sir.
But it's been a wonderful ride. I've enjoyed just about everything I've done my whole life. I've certainly enjoyed my 49 years in the Civil Air Patrol. I've made an awful lot of friends and done an awful lot of interesting things. And I hope to continue as long as I can.
Yes, sir. That's good to hear. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for the interview, sir.
Yes, sir. Awesome.
Thank you.